Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
Well, Brandon, we teased it last week on the episode, and we've got just a great guy, great human being, I think, tonight. And Chyna McCarney is back on the show. It's always, I would definitely refer to him as a friend of the show, but he is somebody that every time we get a chance to talk to him, I'm always just walk away just more impressed. Like, he just is somebody you love to talk to.
It's just and he's genuine. And I think it comes across to the listeners too, John, where, one, and we talk about it briefly, if you follow him on his social media, he's just raw and honest. And when I say raw, I just mean he allows you to see his vulnerable side. Like you see his underbelly. He doesn't try to put stuff out there that's not real. And it comes across when you're talking to him. He's a guy that you really love and pull for, because you know that he's going through things like we all are, and he's willing to share it with our listeners so that they can be the best version of themselves. And so for that, I really, really enjoy talking to him. He's one of those guests that honestly, could talk to for just hours and hours. Yeah,
totally. And the bulk of tonight's show, and we teased it on the last show we did with Chyna, was, but the bulk of it's going to be around that mental health manual that he's produced on his website. You can get it on the website, is the Athletes Against Anxiety and Depression Foundation website, which is www.AAADF.org. And then, of course, Chyna, I think I might even mention this, in the when he first gets on the show, but he gets a lot of responsibilities himself at Jaeger Sports, and of course with the foundation. Also an author. Be the Change is a book that Chyna has written. But you hit it on the head. It's his vulnerability and it's interesting because the listeners will hear, he's even straightforward about when we interviewed him was, hey guys, this will be an interesting discussion because I'm just in this space right now, and it's not a lot of people are that willing to put themselves out there. But you nailed it when you said he does it because, number one, that's just who he is. He's just an honest person, but he also does it because he knows there's somebody out there that may need to hear that, hey, this guy who, from all intents and purposes, you would look at and say, gosh, CEO of his own foundation, and he's the VP and, at Jaeger Sports, he's got everything together, former professional ball player. And hey, you know what? It can everybody's dealing with something, and he's just a perfect example of it. Yeah.
And I think this hour will go by quick for the listeners. And again, I can't wait to have him back on.
Absolutely. So get your pen and paper ready. Here's Chyna McCarney. Brandon, man, I'm so fired up for this conversation. We teased it last week on the show, but good friend of the show and, just an absolute stud. Chyna McCarney is on with us tonight. He's the VP, for those of you who did not have the fortune of listening to the last episode with Chyna. He's the vice president and CFO for Jaeger Sports and the founder and CFO or CEO, I should say, of a website that many of our listeners will be very familiar with, Athletes Against Anxiety and Depression Foundation. The first time we had Chyna on, where you just started unpacking so many different things. He's a best-selling author of Be the Change. And as we were getting into it, we started talking about this mental health manual, and we said, Chyna, we need to get you back. So what's up, brothers? Glad to have you back.
Yes, it's good to see you both. Good to see some smiles, because in California we still have to wear, I mean, maybe everywhere does, I don't know. But we don't see a lot of smiles. You can kind of tell by the squinting eyes when somebody's smiling at you under a mask, but it's good to see your smiles and your eyes and have some human interaction.
Isn't that the truth?
That's rare now.
It is something. So first of all, Chyna, I want to make sure that the listeners do something. And, if you pause this podcast as you're listening to it, but I want you to go to Twitter and search at Chyna McCarney. That's McCarney, and then follow. Then go to Instagram at Chyna McCarney and follow. And I want to brag on you for a second here, right in front of you, right? You always love when that happens. So one of the things that I think is so cool about your content is that so many times in social media now, it's all staged, right? It's just phony. It's like everybody's trying to put on this certain air about their life that just is not reality. And yours is so raw, unedited. And I want to give you an example of this. So recently you posted, I had lunch today in a public place with my best friend and I didn't have a panic attack. I'm proud of myself. Now, here's what I think is so cool about this, because it's the ebb and flow of what you go through all the time. The next couple of days later, you showed the vulnerability and you're discussing these toxic self-standards. And this resonated with me because as I've been reading the mental health manual, one of the sections that you kind of touch on is relationships. And you say in the journal, the key to those relationships is be intentional in our relationships and make adjustments when needed. And you ask in there, and this is getting somewhere, I promise you, you ask in there, how often do you analyze relationships in your life? And it made me think about the fact that sometimes the most toxic relationships that we will have in our lives is the ones we have with ourselves, right? It's that, toxic behavior. It's that, being brutal. I mean, our listeners have heard me say this before. The biggest bully you'll ever face in life is the one you look at in the mirror, because it's the one that's most, intimately has all that intimate knowledge about you. So, first of all, congrats on just having that kind of openness to your social media content. But the second piece of that, though, Chyna, is I want to just kind of hear from you, like, how is that relationship with yourself going? Like, what is, I know that's something we talked about on the last episode that you were on, but how's it been?
Yeah. It's funny because I listened to our last conversation over the last couple of days, and I had texted you a while back, thanking you and the both of you for last time I gave an answer that I was proud of in the moment. And then right after the answer, it was about, relationship and showing grace to others and compassion and yada, yada, yada. And then just so calm, you're like, yeah, let's make sure you show that same grace and compassion and stuff to yourself. And it was like, damn, like, yeah, forgot that. And I wanted to make a point, like all day I was thinking about, like, don't put on a mask tonight when you're on that podcast, because right now I'm not doing as well as I want to be doing with that specific topic. And I think the reason is because over the last 6 months, there's been so much progress that, like, there's this kind of fork in the road between my comfort zone is being a little more negative and a little more perfectionist with my standards, right? And that's what I've been used to for 33 and a half years or whatever. And I've been practicing so much with meditation and trying to catch myself when that negative toxicity starts to go up there, that there's friction going on because there's a change happening. And I think a lot of times, like in workouts, right, you'll hit a plateau and then all of a sudden you do more weight than you've ever done. Or we see this all the time in throwing progressions where a guy will throw and he'll be adding velocity and distance, and then he'll plateau and maybe even regress a little bit and then break through and go on. And I feel like my demons right now are trying super hard to stay there. And so it makes me feel good that transparency on social media, because you want to talk about friction. There's friction with my relationship with social media. I've wanted to delete all of it a lot because of what I see on there. But then when I hear messages like that, and I get DMs all the time of like, dude, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being real. It's like, I can't get it. I'm not going to do that, right? I'm not going to be selfish. I can change my relationship with social media in the way I consume, but the way I put myself out there, I think has helped a lot of people, and I don't want to give that up. So it's kind of long-winded, but the point of the answer, I think, is throughout this entire interview and chat that we have tonight is I'm just going to be raw and honest, because there is friction and there's been depression even in the last month. And it's been a different relationship with that whole process, just trying to observe. And I've seen some of the tools that we talked about on the last episode and some of the stuff of just like, ooh, there's change happening. But right before change, there's some anchors trying to not go away in terms of negative self-talk, and be like, no, doubt yourself, you idiot. Keep doubting yourself. Keep being shitty to yourself. Yeah.
So Chyna, it's interesting because I think we had touched on this before, how as you progressively get better, you know, God has a way to put you into similar situations to almost test that progression, right? Is there one thing that you've kind of seen repeat itself over the past several months where you're to your point where you're going, man, I'm stuck, or I've hit this plateau, or I was doing so good and now I'm not? Is there one situation or instance that you can think of that you're kind of seeing over and over?
Yeah. It's for me, it's alcohol.
Okay.
And my standard with alcohol is perfection. 0, none. And there'll be times where everything will go great, 30, 45, 60, 6 months even at times. And then I just go, like, I get to a point of either stress, boredom, because I'm always trying to fix everything, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a little bit of what I'm going through right now, is trying to allow myself to not have to control all the elements, right? And just let's see what happens in life. But I'll always get to this point of like burnout a little bit to where I'm like, okay, I need to turn the brain off. And we talked about this on the last episode that I was on, is that substance turns the brain off for a little bit. Now, the negatives outweigh it by 1 billion times for that 20 minutes of fake peace that you get from this toxic chemical. But I think that could be, a number of different things from a number of different people. Some people turn to food. Some people turn to other drugs or other things. But for me, it's alcohol, and it comes up in like a wave of binge to turn the brain off. And then it adds layers. Then I get that negative self-talk even harder about messing up, about you were doing so great. Then you get into depression and all that stuff. So, yeah, I think that's the one thing that rears its ugly head for me.
Well, you mentioned it in one of your posts recently. You said about, you could do 100 days perfectly, and then you mess up the one day, even really just the one moment, right? Because that's really what we're talking about. Is it's not even days, it's a moment. It's not like even 24 hours or 12 hours of that day that you messed up. You messed up in a moment. And then that moment becomes, you allow that to become 100% of the focus, where it was really just less than 1% of the time or whatever. So, but it is an interesting thing, because Brandon and I on our show last week, we talked about this idea that I think a lot of times people, they look from the outside and they're like, oh, Chyna, he's written this book, Be the Change, and he's got this manual, the mental health manual, and he's got all these different things, and he talks about the sections, and he talks about the resources. He has to have it all. Like, he's got all these tools at his disposal. It's got to be just one of those things where it's, he's got it all figured out. But the reality of it is you don't. Like, even when we talk about this, Brandon was sharing and I were talking about this last week, is we talk to folks like yourself all the time and hear all these great systems and strategies about, staying in the moment and, adjusting and your reaction to things and controlling your emotions. And we're still like a work in progress. I mean, it just never stops. But I think that's oftentimes the way it is. Because as you were talking about this, and maybe because it's just fresh in my mind of reading the mental health manual, I was like, check, there's a resource. Here's something you need to look. You know what I mean? I was like going through those things as you were laying all these things out about like, oh, you could take time and do this, or you could take time and do that. And it's not that you don't know. It's just sometimes, I don't know. I don't want to say we forget, but it goes back to that. Am I treating myself the same way I would want to be treating somebody else? And, we all know we don't do that.
Yeah. And I think life happens sometimes, and when I was listening to our last episode, and I talked about how I had every resource imaginable with Alan Jaeger from 12 years old, mental training, and, and then, like I said last time, 10 years later, I threw a bullpen where I implemented it perfectly. And I was like, what the just happened in the last decade? And I think that's the part as I'm getting a little older, and like hearing great reminders from guys like you last time about that grace and compassion with yourself. Because that's everyone in my network that loves me always is like, dude, when are you going to realize like you're doing things amazing? Because they see me when I make the one mistake, I go into a dark hole, and they're like, dude, did you forget about the last 35 days and and it's like, so I'm starting to realize that where when mistakes do occur, what's pretty cool to watch now is the duration of time of sulking, anger is shortening. And I think that's key. When you make a mistake, you gotta, there's no use dwelling on it, and all you can control is kind of today. And that's kind of that progression. Like even now saying that, my chest got tight, and I'm like trying to believe it as I say it out loud. And you can have all the tools in the world, and quote unquote experts are human beings too. And they're going to have really crappy days, and they're going to make mistakes against what they preach. And I think that's kind of the beauty and the process of life until we leave the planet.
What's interesting, Chyna, is that, most of the guests that we talk to that get into this field, they get into it because it was something they needed to begin with. And so I would, one of the takeaways that I've gained in the past year of doing the podcast is most of the people that are in this field and now are the people that needed it most then, right? And so I think it's an amazing thing that you're doing by being able to take that life experience and everybody that's successful at this is empathetic, like a true empath of being able to go, yeah, man, I know exactly what you're going through. And, you talk about in the manual, just how to let regret go, right? How to not be the perfectionist, like all of that type of thing. And I think so many people forget that perfection is the absolute, killer of progress. And even if it's just a little bit, I mean, I hear that story of a 12-year-old Chyna being able to finally hook up with Alan. And I hear that and go, my gosh, but what if he didn't, right? Like, instead of why did it take so long, it's more like, yeah, but what if he didn't? And you found kind of what you were looking for or what you needed, and here you are giving it back. And I think it's a tremendous thing. And what you've done with the manual and the companion journal are just, I urge every listener to go out there and get it for sure.
So let me ask you this, Chyna. And before we get into the manual itself, because as Brandon points out, I mean, there's so many different resources in here. You have a dedication in there. It's, to my mom, Loretta, proof that simple conversations can lead to amazing things. Tell me about that statement.
Yeah. So my mom and I's relationship isn't great. It's work in progress, and kind of allowing that to be is one of the things I'm trying to do now, and not trying to fix everything like I always try to do. Like, let's do this. It's like, let's let life happen and see what happens. But I was talking to her, it might have been month 1 or 2 of the pandemic. So this is March or April of 2020 now, which is bizarre. We're in 2022 already.
It's crazy.
But I was on the phone with her, and I was walking around the park right here outside my house, and we talk once a month, maybe in a good period of time. Whereas my dad and I might talk 3 or 4 times a week about what's going on in life and stuff. But her and I were just talking about life and about AAAD. And I was like, I'm kind of at a crossroads with AAAD because it's a great cause. It's a great this, but it's like, I need to be competing for something with AAAD. And like, what am I tangibly giving people, And in her innocence, because we don't talk that much, and just, she's like, well, what other products could you do? Could you do like a manual or something, like something for mental health or this and that? And I was like, oh boy, there it is. And so it just like planted this little seed on this, it might have been a 45-second duration in our long, probably hour-long talk, but it was like, I was just venting about, I need something tangible, or I need something to be focused on right now, because I was so bored with the lockdown, like we all were. You got that stir craziness a little bit. Everybody processed it differently, but this was 2 months in or so, and I was just like, I need something to focus on. And yeah, she just dropped that little sentence. And so as I was writing it, I haven't done a lot of that for that side of the family, for my mom, and the companion journals dedicated to my sister. And so it was just like a little sentence that was more cathartic for me than anything else, to just remember, regardless of your relationships with people or what time has passed, or, what stuff has gone on in your past together, there can be production with communication if you're open-minded and have an open heart. And that's kind of a moment in time that now might save somebody's life with the manual or journal. So it's pretty neat.
I love this story. You reminded me of a quote I heard not too long ago, was the secret to a better future is to give up your hope for a better past. Ooh. And it really resonated, because there's so many people that I know personally that have had just those simple moments. They have, maybe relationships that aren't quite what they want them to be, especially with immediate family. And sometimes it just is one of those things that being able to recognize and understand and that, hey, all that happened, right? But it has no bearing on what's about to happen. It has no bearing on, anything that's in the future. We can have, it's all open pages and open books in front of you as far as relationships go, especially. And it just all depends on how you guys are wanting to write that. So I think it's a good thing that you did there, man. How did you come up with the list of resources? Because there's so many sections in here that are all quality. It's, the bad habits to avoid, therapy, exercise, nutrition. I mean, we'll get in. I want you to unpack a couple of these, but was that something you sat down with some other people and just started brainstorming, or was that just personal inventory, really, of just like, hey, here's some things I've been using, might help somebody else?
Yeah. So the first thing I did, once I kind of had the little format and structure in place, I just wrote everything I had tried for my personal journey, which gave me X amount. And then I went on the old reliable Google and just like, best resources for mental health. I searched like a bunch of different ways that I could find. And if any of them came up consistently that they were being recommended by top research or professionals, I was like, I should probably add that one in there if I didn't have it. But yeah, I'd say, I should probably know it off the top of my head exactly how many resources are in there, but I'd say about 80%, 85% were just me kind of based on my own therapy and whatnot. what I had been recommended, what I had tried. So combination of both research and then my own life research.
Well, you have there's 21 sections, numerous resources, and you have a line in the book that I actually used in a business meeting of mine today, which is, it doesn't matter how many resources you have. If you don't know how to use them, it will never be enough. And it's a quote that, it was in the book, and it's true. It's like Dave Meyer, I don't know if you know who Dave Meyer is. He was our very first guest ever on the Mental Advantage podcast. He is a physical therapist, wrote a book From Injured to Elite. Really good guy, had worked in the St. Louis Cardinals organization and has his own podcast now. And Dave, when we had him on the show, he said that one of the key things to therapy is taking ownership of it as early as possible, is really individualizing it and then taking ownership of it. And that's something that I think really resonates for the reader in this manual. Is you do a great job of kind of breaking it down as that what, why, and how, what's the resource? Why is it important? How do I implement it? But more importantly, you say in there, they're not all going to be for everybody. It's not like a punch list, right? This is not telling you to go through every one of these resources. It's saying, take a look at all of them, decide which ones are going to be good for you, and then go forward with it. But you really have to, at some point, take ownership of that.
Yeah. And I think that's, I think we ended our last episode that us three did together where you said, knowledge plus action equals everything, that quote. And then the second part of it was
knowledge without action equals nothing.
Nothing, right. Yeah. And so I think that's like the bottom line, like on the back of the manual, there's like the little description, and then right in the middle, all by itself on the page, is the key with a question mark, action. And I don't know when I realized that, but it's been a while where I've had conviction on, and that's why my tagline is always be the change. It's like, you take action towards changes you want to see. They're not always going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fall flat on your face a lot, but you're going to learn every single time you take action. You can guarantee yourself no education by not taking any action, because then you're just stuck with whatever you have, your excuses, your laziness, the why me and this and that. And I was the woe is me person with anxiety and depression and panic attacks and alcohol and my parents' divorce and incarcerated mother, all this stuff. And it's like, okay, that's all real stuff, that's all real. But what are you going to do about it? And there's still really crappy days, and there's still depression bouts of just, I'm in my bed watching Ozark for 2 days or something, whatever show I want to watch. But I can promise you that if you just start taking action, and it might be a tiny step to start, Tom Brady's my favorite, one of my favorite athletes, him, Kobe. But Tom Brady was talking about how do you do this at 44 years old? And he's like, basically, I'm summarizing, but he basically said 2 decades of tiny changes, And it was like, yeah, you're too attractive to have that kind of philosophy, right? But it was just like, I have felt that over the last 6 years, and especially over the last 12 to 18 months, where it's like, holy crap, something's working. Like, I'm feeling better in public. Like, dialogue's different inside my head, and trying to articulate that out loud to like get people to get it. Like, you don't really want to tell people, I'm finally feeling some changes 6 years later, right. But 6 years is going to pass regardless. And it might be 6 weeks for somebody else where they feel it, and everybody's journey is going to be different. But if you don't take action, you can guarantee that you're going to be exactly where you are, regardless of the duration of time that passes. And that's kind of the theme, is try the resources, keep the ones that work, throw away the ones that don't, and move on. And the more you expose yourself to, the more you're going to find what works for you. And that's kind of the theme to that structure of the manual.
I really, really like that, Chyna, because the manual, it feels almost like a recipe book. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm going to take like 2 cups of exercise and nutrition. I'm going to take just a pinch of saying no. Like, you know what I mean? And to your point that you were just saying, you don't want to go dump a bunch of salt into something you're cooking, right? You got to try it and take those baby steps. So what was the first thing where you were like, you know what, this piece, whether it's volunteering or whatever it is, this makes me feel different? Do you remember which one was your first one where you're like, wow, okay, let's get a little more of that?
Yeah, I think innately exercise was always just there because I feel great when I exercise. But the one that kind of changed everything was therapy, because I was terrified of therapy, like a lot of people are. Mm-hmm. But then as soon as I started to do it, I just took ownership of myself, unapologetically. This is who I am. I'm going to embrace this from now on. This is a part of my journey. This is something to compete and attack. And then everything else kind of fell into place. And so now in 2022, therapy is a component, but it's way less a component than it was in 2015. Because in 2015, I had to get real with myself, and I needed a therapist to challenge me and to tell me the stats and to kind of get everything going. But now, my non-negotiable now, I tell everybody, is sleep. Mm-hmm. If I get 6 or less hours, my anxiety, if I could quantify it, is probably twice as bad the next day.
Really?
And I'm more susceptible to a triggering a bigger physiological response in terms of adrenaline and that world kind of. But if I get 6+ hours, or definitely 8 hours, and then it goes the other way too. I don't like more than 9 or something. I'm just a groggy teenager at that point with no hair. But right now, sleep's a non-negotiable. Exercise is a non-negotiable. I have to, just because it makes me feel better about myself. And then the one I'm freaking trying to get my personal best mental squat, high of all time is it's self-talk, and it's that grace and compassion part that is the most challenging right now in terms of implementation and not letting it spiral, and then getting angry about it spiraling, and then having worse self-talk, and then it just stacks and goes into layers. Yeah.
It's interesting because so you and I were probably going into therapy right around the same time, and one of the things that, and I've talked about it on other podcasts, I'm not doing therapy. That's for people that's got something wrong with them. I'm just this or this. I would encourage the listeners, if you're hearing this, don't be scared to talk to people, man. Straight up, there are people that, and you mention it a lot, you're not alone. And seek wisdom from people that know this stuff. Because one of the things that I for sure came away with was a much better ability. One, I really didn't. At some point, you just stop worrying about what other people think. I could care less what anybody thinks of me at this point, because I have a pretty good understanding of myself. And without therapy, I wouldn't have gotten there. I mean, it was to be able to, the fact that you even have the self-realization, Chyna, to be going, well, this works, that works. If I get more or less, I'm going to be, a pouty little, dude the whole day, for our teenage listeners. So yeah. I think I would just put it out there to the folks that are listening. Therapy with the right person can be it can be a life-changing, perspective-changing, maybe not life-changing, but at least a perspective-changing event for you. Because sometimes all you got to do is turn around to realize, the door's open, right? I mean, you feel trapped and you feel like you're in this cage, and man, if you just kind of do a little bit of a turn, the wall's not coming in. You got an exit strategy. So, for a listener, go out and allow someone else to help you change your perspective, because we do it in relationships all the time, right? You fall in love, that person makes you feel this way or that way, and it just opens your eyes to something else. So allow a therapist to allow you to love yourself, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, you had me rush into my notepad because you said just two words. You captured for me what therapy at least accomplished for me. Mm-hmm. And you said it so well, where it's like that permission to be vulnerable and not judge yourself, which immediately takes the pressure off of anyone else judging you or looking at you or whatever. Because when you're fighting to hide something, mm-hmm. then you cannot get angry about somebody else's judgment if you're not presenting 100% of yourself. Right. And I think therapy, that's what therapy did for me immediately, where it was just like, oh my God, I could be honest about this. Like I could just share. And then perspective, you said the word perspective, and a perspective changing event. And I remember I had this in business, and I remember Jim Vatcher, our CEO at Jaeger Sports, we had some meeting, I don't know, irrelevant at this point, but I kept bringing up in the negotiation my perspective, our perspective. And I was saying that out loud. And after the meeting, Jim took me aside. He's like, don't ever forget that word. He's like, I'm never going to forget it, because your perspective is yours. Yep. So like, it didn't seem threatening in the negotiation, because it was just like, this is how I'm seeing the situation. And when I started to get that in life, away from business, about like, just like I have my own perspective of my anxiety and my this, my that, somebody else might have their complete perspective that is theirs, and it's not my decision to judge that perspective. It's theirs. They own it. And that helped with my family relationships. How I processed the past mm-hmm. may not be how someone else in the family processed it. And I think you just captured that so well, where therapy gives you this sense of like, you stop judging yourself, which makes you care a lot less about other people judging you.
Which all of a sudden frees up. So if we are, we don't have an infinite number of resources, physical and mental, you have to put your focus somewhere. And as soon as you stop pretending to be something that you may not be at that moment, I mean, that pressure is gone. Like it frees up so many resources that you can now really focus and allow yourself to focus on you, instead of, well, I hope he thinks this or she sees me as that. Who cares? Like, let me just work on my shit. And you know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm going to be cheering for you. I love you. And I'll support you any way that I can. But if you think I'm a, whatever, hey, that's you. That's not me, right? That's your circus, and I'm not one of your monkeys. So we're good, right? So,
yeah, one of it reminds me, your all's discussion reminds me of something in the manual about the section on asking for help. And I was thinking about this, Chyna, and maybe the statistics on this, but I would imagine, listening to you two, that men in general probably fall well short of women when it comes to going to therapy, or at least making that first action, making that first move to do it. And I think it kind of goes back to this idea, the way that men are wired to not ask for help. It's almost like a badge of honor. Like you hear guys say, I don't ask for directions. That's not me. Just something as simple as that they don't even pull over. I'm the opposite, by the way. Like, I'm the person that as soon as I'm lost, I am immediately pulling over, rolling my window down, like, hey man.
First of all, can we just take a pause there and wonder why you don't have a GPS in your car? Why are you pulling over for anything? That's number one.
Hey, I like to talk to people. I'm somebody who just, communicator.
Clearly.
Yeah. But it is true. It's like one of those things where I think because it now has become this thing where it's like, okay, we don't ask for help. I can fix it up myself, whether it's fixing the TV, whether it's fixing something around the house, which again, neither of those things. I'm starting to wonder whether or not, I'm starting to wonder actually if I'm supposed to turn in a man card anytime now, because all of the things I've just described, I fall in none of those categories. But you get what I'm getting at is that I do think it is one of those things that men just typically don't ask for help. And I think it's probably as a result caused a lot of men out there to suffer. And so hopefully, I know that we have a lot more listeners that are men than we do that are female, which also is like our college time.
I was going to say, that sounds like a Saturday night in Charleston.
Couldn't help it. I didn't want to break up the seriousness of that, but as I was saying it, I was thinking it. Yeah.
No, to your point, I think I was trying, as you were talking, I was trying to process, like, where did I get my desire or comfort asking for help? And maybe it's more recency bias where I'm way better at it now because of the mental health journey and different things. But I always, especially with my dad, I would ask him for help with everything. And my stepmom taught me the value of like valet parking, bellhops, AAA, Waze, like convenience over pride. It's like you get a flat tire. It's like, hi, AAA. I don't know what the heck I'm doing here, so come change my tire. And I think the more and more men are kind of willing to be vulnerable and share, and to kind of bookend the point. If you want a lot less lonely all men nights in college, you get good at sharing your feelings. You're going to do a lot better with the ladies. And they like someone that's vulnerable and willing to kind of discuss that stuff. And that's
true.
Yeah. So I think therapy is a good place to start for that.
So Chyna, one of the first, actually, I think it is the very first section in the mental health manual. And guys, by the way, if you're looking for the mental health manual, the easiest way probably, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Chyna, is to go to www.AAADF, right, .org. And there's a link in there. And really, if you're just simple about the whole thing and just want to search Chyna McCarney mental health manual, that will probably pull up a link as well. And I want to make sure this is clear because Chyna does a great job of pointing this out a few different times in the book. Is he's not a doctor. He's not claiming to have all of the answers, and he's not saying this is, all the scientific research. It's not a term paper, right? This is a resource manual that somebody who's going through this on a daily basis and continues to go through this on a daily basis has put forth and said, hey, here's some of the things that has helped me. Here's why, here's how, the what, all of that. But one of the very first things you talked about was the bad habits to avoid. And I think it's kind of as the best offense is a good defense, right? Is making sure that you're, avoiding some of these things. And I love the quote because I'm a big fan of Dennis Waitley that you have in there is the truth is you don't break a bad habit, you replace it with a good one. And it makes me think about, when I was being trained in mental performance, one of the things that I learned about was this idea of reverse engineering those habit loops, right? So if you have something that is bad that you want to change, is figure out what that trigger is. And then whenever you don't avoid you're not always going to be able to avoid the trigger, but with that trigger, maybe you replace that behavior, that next reward piece of it with, instead of, eating cookies at 9:00 at night because you're watching some, TV Ozark marathon. Brandon's laughing because it's a whole nother story that I'll tell one other time about eating late at night, watching some Tony Little infomercial.
Hey, so right, Tony. I got to do something. Yep.
But the point being is that, finding a way to say, okay, that trigger of me, wanting to go to the refrigerator and get something. Now, instead of having junk food there, I'll just have celery. I'll just have something that's good. So I'm not fighting the trigger. I'm just replacing whatever that is that it's, triggering.
Yeah. Well, I think if you're honest with yourself and aware, like awareness is the first kind of battle, is you have to be willing to take responsibility for the situation and realize you're eating those cookies, watching whoever the hell Tony Little is. But if you kind of look at your triggers, and I don't know if we talked about this last time on the podcast, where there's something called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, where basically your brain works for you. What you start to tell it, it's the reticular activating system. It's way above my pay grade in terms of science and stuff. But the example I always use is when you're shopping for a new car and you want to get, let's say, a red Audi. All of a sudden there's red Audis everywhere. Well, there's not a bunch more red Audis out in your life now. It's just your brain has been trained. I'm looking for that. And so it starts to bring that into your life. So if you start right now, every time I negatively self-talk myself, there's a trigger in my head right now. Hey, analyze that. Pause real quick. What's the opposite of that? Oh, you're a piece of shit. No, I made a mistake. Let's learn from it. Let's move on. Something like that. And so if you can identify your bad habits, your brain will start to work for you to in the moment, something feels a little different, almost like deja vu. And it's oh yeah, I'm working on this. What's the step I can take here? And a lot of times just that little pause is enough for you to take the right action. And so, yeah, I wanted to start kind of with just, here's all the bad habits. That was sort of the same thing where I wrote a list of mine. And then I did a lot more research on that stuff based on the medical professionals and all that stuff. Here are the most toxic habits to avoid if you want to improve your mental health. And then we start there, so that you can start to kind of be aware of those for yourself and then start working towards replacing it, like you said, with some of the other resources that are in there. And for full transparency with the audience right now, just because we're just having fun and we're laughing right now, because I'm working so hard on this affirmation thing and my positive self-talk. So I got exposed about 3 months ago to the Miracle Morning. I'd never heard of it. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. No. It's basically an acronym, SAVERS, SAVERS. And to start, you do 10 minutes of each of them. S is silence. A is affirmation. V is visualization. E is exercise. R is reading. And S is scribing or writing or journaling or whatnot. And there's a documentary, there's a book, there's all kinds of stuff, but I'll give you the nuts and bolts and then I'll collect my royalties. But silence is meditation, obviously. That's the first thing you do in the morning. You just 5-10 minutes, whatever it is for you. But the A is affirmations, okay? And for it to be effective, it's all scientifically backed and everything. Got to be audible. It helps if your body's moving, and you just do it until your brain believes it. And so for 30 days straight in December, and I've been doing it lately, I got to get back on my grind, but thank God I live alone. Standing in my living room, they say to there's something with the, I think it's called the vagal nerve, where if you bounce. Vagus? Yeah. And so they say if you can do the affirmations while doing that. And so I've been jumping around in my living room. I am incredible. I am amazing. I can do anything. And I'm just thinking if there's any people walking by somehow that see these windows or something, oh my gosh, that guy, talk about mental health issues in that house. But it's amazing I did it every day in December, and it was incredible, the momentum I started to feel, and like the clarity and the calmness and the presence, because it was all of the things combined. It wasn't just, my dog jumping with me. It's like, what are you doing in here?
Right.
And then the visualization, you just sit and you visualize, and exercise is whatever you want it to be. But the transparency I wanted to share is, like, if you want to, like, action, right? It feels ridiculous. It still feels ridiculous, but throughout the day, all of a sudden, my brain's more aware of when the negative self-talk comes. It's like, no, get back there. And there was, a little bit momentum created there. And then the new year happened. And some things took me away from that process, but that's action, right? It's action with something uncomfortable. And, I don't know what I would do if I got into a relationship again, though, and there was a girl sleeping here or something. I don't know if I'm jumping in my living room at 5:30 in the morning, like, I am amazing, I am incredible, I can do anything.
That's what you just tell her, hey, shouldn't you be jumping and saying the same thing?
Saying the same thing.
Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing, is you just have her do it, telling you all those good things.
Now you talk about affirmation. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Find a partner that'll do that for you. That's when you got something.
Then you're golden.
That's it.
I mean, Brandon and I were both writing that down. I think that sounds really good, actually, because that's one of your strengths, whether you recognize this or not, is your level of awareness. And Brandon kind of touched on this earlier, but, in light of, and it's probably just through a lot of reflection that this has come to be, but your ability, we always say that the number one thing with mental performance has to be, you got to be first aware that this is going on. And there's a great book, and I may have mentioned this on the show before, called The Oz Principle. And I don't know if it's an old business book. You'll appreciate it on a couple of different levels. And I think you would get something out of this book, but it's a book about accountability. And there's 4 steps to it. There's see it, own it, solve it, and do it. And the own it piece is the piece that everybody gets tripped up by, because they will see that there's a problem, and then they want to immediately go to solving the problem, and then they want to just do the solution. But the reason that it fails so often is because nobody takes the time to own it and say, this is me. This is something I have to own before they start into that solve it and do it piece. So it's just something that made me think about that when you were, I was thinking about that awareness piece. As far as the immersion. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, I know this is like a free flowing thought, welcome to my mind, because this is how it works, right? I mean, it's like halfway through, I'll find something else to go on. But when you were talking about just those negative thoughts and having that awareness to catch them and know that, hey, that's not healthy, that's not where I want to be. In the manual, you talk about this immersion practice, and I thought that was really cool. Just that idea of finding something. I think the listeners could benefit from this. You used examples in the book about, if you're having a depressive thought or if you're experiencing a panic attack, but I also would say that you could probably apply it to some of those negative thoughts. But as soon as you are thinking anyway that's getting you outside of the current present moment, it's important to that immersion practice of smell, feel, see, those things that are in your direct environment that you can smell, feel, and see, and all that's going to get you back into the moment.
Yeah. And my relationship with that practice started with panic attacks specifically, because panic attacks, a lot of time there's like a trigger, and then it's all dictated by what you do after that. Right. And a lot of times, especially if you're, maybe not educated or you're dealing with it for the first time, it's like, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling like this? Oh my God. And then it just goes. And then you're having more physical symptoms, and you're just totally stacking the back and forth between the physical and the mental. And then you have a full blown 20-minute panic attack where you feel like you're going to pass out, die, whatever it may be. And so one of the first kind of tools I was given by a therapist was try to, locate 5 things in your general area that you can see, 5 things you can hear, 5 things you can smell. And it's all to get that thought cycle broken in the moment. And for me, it was panic attacks. But I think, like you said, it works for anything. And I think it can even work where, like, this has started to happen for me, like immersion practice. If I have a negative thought about myself or something, sometimes instead of trying to immerse myself away from that thought, I'll immerse myself in it and analyze it with a rational brain, because a lot of times those thoughts are irrational, or the process is irrational. Like, you're a piece of crap. Okay. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to think about that. Am I? No. Yeah. Right. Rationally, I know. It's right. Like, no. You've got a good heart. We can sit here. We can rationally say you're not a piece of crap. So whatever voice that is, I'm not giving that power. And you kind of immerse in a different way. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the immersion practice, I think there's so many different layers to it, but on a very basic level, I think a good mental health exercise to start is go outside in a environment that has some stimulus. That's not the right word. I think I used that word on the last podcast. Stimuli.
There you go.
Yeah. Stimulus.
We'll go with you on that.
So again, that's what everybody's waiting in their mailbox for, like their 6th one, right? Now?
Right. That's right.
Yeah. So stimuli. But like, if there's nature, if you can hear birds, or you can hear water, or you can, even here, I'm right next to LAX, and like one of the sounds is planes. Los Angeles sirens, like anything you can kind of use your senses. It just kind of pulls you back to the present moment and gets you away from the negative thought cycle you were kind of in.
Yeah. It reminded me about, Tyler Pazik's book I apologize to Greg. I always end up forgetting Greg's last name, that was the co-author of that book with Tyler. But it's ask more, listen better, talk less, listen better. But the point being, in that book, they talk about this idea that when you're having those negative self-talks, or if a player, for example, is talking that, I suck, I'm no good, or whatever, it's just asking yourself, is this thought that I'm having right now, is that kind of self-talk, is that helping me get closer to the goals I want to attain, or is it worsening the chances that I will get there? So I think that idea that you're using that immersion practice to kind of really use it, look at it with that rational lens, is really, really good. And that's something I hope the listeners, take with them. Well, man, another hour has gone by, and it's always never enough time. There's so many more things, but I'm so glad that you took the time to come and talk to us tonight about the mental health manual. And I really would encourage the listeners to go out there, find it, get the companion manual. There's so many things that you can do in it, and really just start to implement it yourself. There's an old expression, an idea without a plan is just a fantasy. And if you have this idea that you're going to get better with, whether it's just achieving some of the goals that you have for yourself from a mental health standpoint, or if you're suffering or going through some stuff on your own, and you need to first come up with a plan. You need to first be able to look at resources that, like Chyna presents here in this manual, and start to just try it, just start to take that first step, and just make sure you're giving it a shot. And it may or may not be for you. And if it's not for you, that's okay. And let's just move on to the next one, and then keep on going. And you're going to hopefully get, as you say, and Brandon was talking about, there is the on the back of the book is the recipe, that mental health recipe, right? It's like using all these things is basically just kind of coming up with that recipe. It's in the back of the journal, it says endless ingredients to help you find your life's best recipe. So great job with it, and great job with everything that you got going on. What else? You got any projects you're working on right now?
There's some exciting things at AAAD that are in the works. We've got some initiatives with, I won't say the club yet, but there's a Major League Baseball team that's considering donating per strikeout that their pitching staff gets. Wow. And so that would be gnarly, and they don't suck, so they're going to get some strikeouts.
Yeah, I was going to say, hopefully it's a good staff.
Hopefully they're not throwing in the back.
Yeah, exactly. It's not at Coors Field or anything, but and they're not taking donations back if they give up home runs. But
nice.
There's the first ever AAAD golf tournament is, we'll see with COVID, but we're thinking in Phoenix in the fall, right around the kind of Arizona Fall League and stuff like that. But it's been a wild journey. Like there's just so much that I learned. I talked about it last time where I just started this because of my own little, battle and shared on social media, and then it kind of took off, and all of a sudden it was like, you better treat this like a business. And then I had to get it structured like that. And my dad always says, overnight successes take about 10 years. So we're 6 years in and getting a little bit of momentum, and just stuff like this. When I was thinking when you were talking is, you thank me for coming on, but it's like, this is the kind of stuff I feel like we're kind of getting away from. Everything's being designed for less human interaction, unfortunately, with technology crap out of me. But it's like, this is therapeutic, right? Getting with like-minded people, talking about things that interest you, like try to cultivate that in your own life. It doesn't have to be mental health. It could be video games. It could be baseball. It could be anything you want, but get around people that kind of share in that, you're conversating to kind of formulate your next action. There's nothing wrong with venting. There's nothing wrong with gossip, as long as the end of that, you've gotten to a point where you know what action you're going to take next. And I appreciate you guys so much, and was so looking forward to doing this. And I, like you said, another hour went by and it felt like it was 5 minutes. Yeah. And I learn every time. I've got my chicken scratch. You said I wasn't a doctor, but my handwriting says otherwise. Yeah, it was good. And right when we get off, I'm on my computer right now, so I will be Googling who Tony Little is, because I want to be in on the joke.
We'll tell you. Just hold on.
That's right.
We'll sign off real quick, and then we'll share that story with you.
I would say this, Chyna, the next action that Brandon and I are going to take is to book our flights for Phoenix in the fall, because we will 100% be there for this golf tournament. It's something that we've been behind since the first time we heard about it, and really proud of you, man. I mean, just keep doing what you're doing, and any way we can ever support you, you just let us know, because we will be there in a second. So keep it up.
Well, I appreciate that, and appreciate you guys for sure. And Brandon, your lungs were awesome.
Hey, I was on mute. I appreciate that. I feel okay right now.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, Chyna.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.